Welcome to the Sleep Story Haven, your peaceful sanctuary where the whispers of ancient forests meet the gentle rhythm of moonlit shores. Here, time slows to the rhythm of your breathing. Worries dissolve like mist, and your mind finds the peace it's been seeking. Each story is crafted to guide you through enchanted landscapes and tranquil moments, designed to quiet your thoughts and prepare your spirit for deep, restorative sleep. So find your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and let tonight's gentle tale carry you to the peaceful dreams that await. Welcome to your Sleep Story Haven. Take a deep breath and let our story begin. The Byzantine Garden Sanctuary. Chapter 1: The Weary Traveler. Elena moved through the ancient streets of Constantinople with footsteps that echoed the exhaustion in her soul. The weight of sleepless nights pressed against her shoulders like a heavy cloak, and each breath she drew seemed to carry the dust of endless worries. She had come to this timeless city seeking something she could not name, perhaps peace, perhaps simply the ability to rest without dreams that scattered like autumn leaves in a restless wind. The narrow cobblestone pathways wound between buildings that had witnessed centuries of human passage, their weathered stones holding stories of countless other weary souls who had walked these same routes. Elena's fingers trailed along the warm limestone walls, feeling the subtle textures left by time and weather, as if the very stones might offer some comfort to her restless spirit. Above her, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the maze of ancient architecture, creating patterns of light and dark that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her own uncertain heartbeat. The air carried the mingled scents of honey pastries from distant bakeries, jasmine climbing forgotten walls, and the salt breeze that drifted up from the Bosphorus. These fragrances wove together into something that spoke of home, though Elena had never lived in this place before. Her footsteps slowed as she noticed how the late sunlight caught the edges of carved doorways and window frames, illuminating intricate patterns that seemed to shift and breathe with each passing moment. The city around her hummed with a gentle energy that was neither hurried nor urgent, a rhythm that invited her to match its pace, to let her shoulders drop just slightly, to allow her breathing to deepen into something more natural than the shallow gasps that had become her habit. As Elena continued her wandering, she became aware of sounds that layered themselves like silk scarves in the evening air. The distant call of seabirds mixed with the soft murmur of conversations in languages she could not understand, but somehow felt comforted by. Church bells chimed the hour from various directions, their bronze voices creating a gentle symphony that seemed to acknowledge her presence Without demanding anything in return, the streets began to widen slightly, opening into small squares where fountains trickled with water that caught the golden light. Elena found herself drawn to these water sounds. The way they seemed to wash over her thoughts and blur the sharp edges of her worries. She paused beside one fountain, watching how the water fell in crystalline streams, each droplet carrying a tiny fragment of sunlight before disappearing into the pool below. Standing there, Elena felt the first stirring of something she had almost forgotten: curiosity. Not the anxious, grasping kind that had driven her restless searching for so many months, but a gentle wondering that arose like a flower opening to morning light. Her eyes began to notice details she had overlooked in her hurried passage through the world. The way ivy curved around ancient columns, the patterns of wear on stone steps, the soft shadows that gathered in protected alcoves. A gentle breeze stirred the air around her, carrying new scents that seemed to beckon from somewhere deeper within the labyrinth of streets. Elena lifted her face to catch this breeze, feeling it brush across her cheeks like a whispered invitation. The sensation reminded her of childhood moments when the world had felt safe and full of gentle mysteries waiting to be discovered. Without conscious decision, Elena found herself following the direction of the breeze, her steps becoming lighter as she moved away from the wider streets and into narrower passages that seemed to wind toward some hidden heart of the ancient city. The walls here were older, their surfaces bearing the patina of countless seasons, and the shadows gathered more deeply, creating a sense of protective enclosure that began to ease the tension in her chest. As she walked, Elena became aware that the sounds of the city were growing softer, as if she were moving into a space that existed slightly apart from the ordinary world. The water sounds grew stronger, more complex, as if multiple fountains were singing together in harmonious conversation. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility, and Elena felt her breathing slow to match the peaceful rhythm of her surroundings. The path curved gently ahead, disappearing around a corner marked by a wall covered in climbing roses that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Elena approached this corner with a sense of stepping towards something that had been waiting for her, though she could not have said what or why. Her hand reached out almost of its own accord to touch the roses, and she marveled at their velvety softness, their fragrance that seemed to contain the essence of every peaceful morning she had ever known. As she rounded the corner, Elena saw before her an arched doorway set into an ancient wall. The doorway was partially hidden by curtains of jasmine and honeysuckle, their white and yellow blooms creating a natural threshold that seemed to pulse gently with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Above the arch, she could make out the faint outlines of golden mosaic tiles that caught the slanting sunlight and threw it back in gentle, shimmering patterns. Elena stood before this doorway for a long moment, feeling that she had arrived at a place of significance, though she could not have explained why. The air around the entrance seemed to vibrate with a quality of peace so profound that it made her want to weep with relief. Through the flowering curtain, she could hear the sound of water moving in complex patterns, fountains that seemed to be having conversations with each other in liquid voices. The fragrance that drifted from beyond the doorway was like nothing Elena had ever experienced. It combined the sweetness of roses with the freshness of moving water, the earthiness of ancient stone with the bright clarity of sunlight filtering through leaves. This scent seemed to reach directly into her chest and begin unknotting tensions she had carried for so long that she had forgotten they were there. Elena's hand moved toward the flowering curtain, her fingers trembling slightly with anticipation and something that might have been hope as her fingertips brushed the jasmine blooms. She felt a warmth spread through her palm and up her arm, as if the flowers were sharing their own deep peace with her tired body. The sensation was so unexpected and so welcome that she closed her eyes for a moment, simply standing in the presence of this mysterious threshold. When she opened her eyes again, the world seemed slightly different. Colors appeared more vivid, sounds more layered and meaningful, and the very air seemed to carry more oxygen than before. Elena took a deep breath, feeling it fill her lungs completely for the first time in months, and stepped forward to part the curtain of flowers and discover what lay beyond. As the jasmine and honeysuckle moved aside with a whisper of leaves and petals, Elena felt she was crossing not just a physical threshold, but moving from one state of being into another. The weariness that had been her constant companion began to shift and soften, like ice beginning to melt in the warmth of spring sunshine. She stepped through the doorway and into whatever sanctuary awaited her beyond. Chapter 2: The Hidden Threshold. The moment Elena's foot crossed the threshold, she felt the world transform around her in ways that seemed to bypass her ordinary senses and speak directly to some deeper knowing within her being. The air itself seemed to have weight and substance, carrying her forward with gentle insistence, as if she were being welcomed by the very atmosphere of this hidden place. Before her stretched a courtyard that defied the logic of the narrow streets she had just left behind. The space opened like a secret heart within the ancient city, surrounded by walls that rose in graceful curves, their surfaces adorned with mosaics that seemed to move and shift in the changing light. These walls created a perfect sanctuary, intimate enough to feel protective, yet spacious enough to allow her spirit to expand and breathe. Elena's eyes moved slowly across the scene, taking in details that seemed to layer themselves in her awareness like veils of silk. The courtyard was paved with stones that had been worn smooth by countless seasons, their surfaces now holding the warmth of the afternoon sun and reflecting it back in gentle waves that made the air shimmer with welcoming energy. Between the stones, tiny flowers had taken root, creating natural patterns that seemed to have been designed by some master artist who understood the deep rhythms of growth and beauty. At the center of the courtyard, a fountain rose in multiple tiers, its carved stone surfaces bearing designs that seemed to tell stories of ancient wisdom and timeless peace. But it was the sound of this fountain that captured Elena's attention most completely. Water flowed from level to level in streams that created not just one voice, but a chorus of liquid tones that seemed to harmonize with each other in complex musical patterns. Elena moved closer to the fountain, her steps slowing as she realized that the water was indeed singing. Each stream, each cascade, each pool created its own note, and together they wove a melody that seemed to resonate with something deep in her chest. The song had no words, yet it spoke to her of rest, of healing, of the possibility of laying down burdens she had carried for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to move through the world without their weight. As she approached the fountain's edge, Elena noticed that the water itself seemed to carry light within its depths. Not the harsh brightness of artificial illumination, but a soft, pearl-like luminescence that seemed to emanate from the water molecules themselves. This gentle radiance cast shifting patterns on the stone basin, creating a dance of light and shadow that drew her gaze deeper and deeper into peaceful contemplation. The fountain's song seemed to grow more complex as Elena listened, revealing layers of melody that had been there all along, but which only became audible as her breathing slowed and her heartbeat found its natural rhythm. She realized that the water was not simply falling by chance, but was guided by channels and curves in the stone that had been carved specifically to create these harmonious tones. Some ancient craftsperson had understood the music that water could make and had created this instrument of liquid peace. Elena sank onto the stone bench that curved around the fountain's base, feeling the warmth of the sun-heated stone through her clothing. As she settled into stillness, she became aware of other sounds layering themselves beneath the fountain's song. The gentle whisper of leaves stirring in a breeze she could not yet feel. The distant drone of bees moving among flowers. The soft, settling sounds of stones cooling as the afternoon progressed toward evening. Around the edges of the courtyard, Elena began to notice the roses. At first, she had registered them only as splashes of color against the ancient walls. But now, she saw that they were arranged in patterns that seemed to have meaning beyond mere decoration. The roses grew in geometric designs that spiraled and curved with mathematical precision. Yet, their natural beauty prevented the patterns from feeling rigid or cold. Instead, they created a sense of perfect order that was entirely harmonious with the organic growth of the living flowers. The colors of the roses seemed to shift and change as Elena watched, though she could not quite catch the moment of transformation. Deep crimson blooms gradually revealed undertones of gold, while white roses showed the faintest blush of pink at their centers. Yellow roses seemed to glow with inner light, and pale purple blooms appeared almost silver in certain angles of the afternoon sun. The effect was like watching a slow, silent fireworks display of gentle color. Elena found herself breathing more deeply as she watched the roses, each inhalation bringing their fragrance more fully into her awareness. The scent was complex and layered, containing not just the sweetness of the flowers themselves, but undertones of the rich earth they grew in, the stone walls that sheltered them, and something else, something that reminded her of peaceful sleep and dreams filled with golden light. As her breathing continued to deepen, Elena became aware that her body was beginning to release tensions she had not even realized she was holding. Her shoulders dropped away from her ears, her jaw unclenched, and her hands relaxed in her lap. It was as if the very air of this place contained some healing quality that worked directly on the knots of stress and worry that had become such familiar companions. The mosaics on the walls began to capture more of Elena's attention as her nervous system settled into greater stillness. She could see now that they depicted scenes of gardens and peaceful gatherings, figures in flowing robes walking among trees heavy with fruit, children playing beside streams that sparkled with crystalline water. But these images seemed to move slightly when she was not looking directly at them, as if they were windows into some realm where perfect peace was not just a dream, but a living reality. Above, the sky was beginning to take on the softer tones of approaching evening. The sun, though still well above the horizon, cast longer shadows that created new patterns of light and shade across the courtyard. Elena watched these shadows shift and dance, feeling her own internal rhythms beginning to synchronize with the gentle pulse of the day's natural progression toward rest. A butterfly landed on the edge of the fountain, its wings catching the light like stained glass. Elena watched it drink from the singing water, noting how even this small creature seemed to participate in the overall harmony of the place. Its wings moved in slow, hypnotic patterns that seemed to match the rhythm of the fountain's song. And Elena found her own breathing beginning to match this same gentle cadence. As the butterfly lifted away from the fountain and spiraled upward into the golden air, Elena felt something within her own chest begin to lift as well. The heavy weight of sleepless nights and restless days seemed to be dissolving, replaced by a quality of lightness she had almost forgotten was possible. She closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the warmth of the sun, feeling its rays penetrate not just her skin, but some deeper layer of her being that had been cold and shadowed for far too long. When she opened her eyes again, Elena noticed details that had escaped her attention before. The edges of leaves seemed to shimmer with a quality of life that was almost visible, and the air itself appeared to dance with tiny motes of light that might have been dust or might have been something far more magical. She blinked slowly, feeling her eyelids grow heavy with a kind of peaceful drowsiness that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with the deep relaxation that comes when the soul finally finds a place where it can rest. Elena settled back against the fountain's stone basin, feeling the gentle vibration of the flowing water through the stone. The sensation seemed to resonate through her entire body, creating a subtle massage that worked on tensions buried so deep she had forgotten they existed. As she listened to the fountain's endless song, she felt herself beginning to drift into a state that was neither sleep nor waking, but something altogether more peaceful, a space where healing could happen without effort, where rest could deepen beyond the need for dreams. Chapter 3: The Singing Waters. As Elena's consciousness settled into the rhythm of the fountain's song, she became aware that the water's voice was not singular, but multiple, as if each stream and cascade had its own personality and story to tell. The highest tier of the fountain produced delicate, crystalline notes that seemed to dance on the air like silver bells, while the broader streams created deeper, more resonant tones that vibrated through the stone and into her very bones. Elena shifted her position on the bench, allowing her back to rest more fully against the warm stone of the fountain's base. As she did so, she felt the vibrations of the flowing water more intensely, as if the fountain were offering her a gentle, continuous embrace. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced before, not just the physical feeling of vibration, but something that seemed to reach into her cells and remind them of their natural capacity for peace and regeneration. She closed her eyes and let her awareness sink deeper into the layers of sound surrounding her. Beneath the fountain's primary melody, She could hear the gentle lapping of water in the various pools, the subtle whisper of droplets falling back to the surface, and the almost inaudible hum that seemed to emanate from the water itself. These sounds wove together into a complex symphony that seemed to have no beginning and no end. An eternal song that had been playing long before her arrival and would continue long after her departure. The water's music began to work on Elena's thoughts in the most gentle way, not forcing them into silence, but allowing them to settle naturally. Like sediment in a still pond, the anxieties and concerns that had been circling in her mind for months began to lose their sharp edges, becoming softer and less demanding of her attention. She found herself able to observe these thoughts without becoming entangled in them, as if the fountain's song were teaching her a new way of relating to the movements of her own mind. As Elena's breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the water's flow, she noticed that the fountain seemed to be responding to her presence. The tones became richer, more layered, as if her listening was somehow completing a circuit that allowed the water to sing more fully. She wondered if this was imagination, or if there was some deeper truth to the idea that consciousness and water could commune in ways that bypassed ordinary understanding. Opening her eyes, Elena gazed into the fountain's depths and saw that the water was indeed luminous, carrying within it points of light that moved like tiny stars through the liquid medium. These lights seemed to pulse gently, creating patterns that reminded her of constellations viewed from a great distance. As she watched, the lights began to synchronize their pulsing with her own heartbeat, creating a visual rhythm that drew her deeper into a state of meditative absorption. The quality of light around the fountain seemed to be changing as well, becoming softer and more golden as the afternoon progressed. Elena realized that the walls of the courtyard were positioned in such a way that they captured and concentrated the sun's rays, creating a microclimate of warmth and illumination that persisted even as shadows began to lengthen in the world beyond these protective barriers. She became aware of the scent of the water itself, not the metallic taste of city fountains, but something that reminded her of mountain streams and morning rain. The fragrance seemed to carry minerals and ozone, the essence of stone and sky combined in perfect balance. Breathing this scent, Elena felt her lungs expand more fully, as if the very air were more nourishing than what she had been breathing for months in the outside world. As Elena's relaxation deepened, she began to notice that the fountain's song was not static, but evolving, following patterns that seemed to correspond to natural rhythms she could sense, but not quite identify. Sometimes the melody would grow more complex, with additional harmonics weaving through the primary theme. At other moments, it would simplify, reducing to the pure, essential tones that seemed to speak directly to the most fundamental aspects of peace and rest. The stone beneath her seemed to pulse gently with the same rhythm as the water, as if the entire fountain were a single, living instrument designed to create harmony between all its elements. Elena pressed her palm against the stone basin and felt warmth flowing through the rock. A warmth that seemed to come not just from the sun, but from some deeper source within the earth itself. She found herself remembering fragments of dreams she had almost forgotten. Dreams of places where water and stone and light worked together to create perfect environments for rest and healing. These memories seemed to be awakening in response to her current experience, as if the fountain were helping her remember truths about peace and restoration that her soul had always known, but her mind had forgotten. The sound of the water began to seem less like sound and more like a form of communication that bypassed her ears and spoke directly to her nervous system. Elena could feel her heart rate slowing, her breathing becoming more rhythmic, and her muscles releasing tensions that had become so familiar she had stopped noticing them. It was as if the fountain's song were teaching her body how to remember its natural state of ease and comfort. A gentle breeze stirred the air around the fountain, and Elena noticed that it carried droplets of the singing water, tiny particles that touched her face like the softest blessing. These droplets seemed to carry the water's luminous quality, and as they touched her skin, Elena felt a subtle tingling that spread from the points of contact throughout her entire body. The sensation was profoundly soothing, as if each droplet were a tiny messenger carrying healing into her cells. Elena opened her eyes fully and looked around the courtyard, seeing it now with vision that seemed clearer and more appreciative than before. The colors were more vivid, the textures more defined, and the overall harmony of the space more apparent. She realized that her perception was being refined by her time with the fountain, as if the water's song were tuning not just her hearing, but all her senses to more subtle and beautiful frequencies. As she watched, she noticed that other creatures seemed drawn to the fountain as well. A small bird alighted on one of the higher tiers, its head tilting as it listened to the water's music before taking a drink. The bird's movements were graceful and unhurried, as if it too were affected by the peaceful quality of this place. When it flew away, its flight pattern seemed to follow the melody of the fountain's song, tracing musical phrases in the air with its wings. Elena felt a profound gratitude beginning to well up in her chest. Gratitude for this unexpected sanctuary, for the fountain's healing song, for the simple fact that such places of peace could exist in a world that often seemed designed to prevent rest and restoration. This gratitude seemed to resonate with the water's music, creating a harmony between her inner experience and the fountain's eternal song. She realized that she could happily remain in this spot for hours, perhaps even days, simply listening to the water's voice and allowing its healing frequencies to work their subtle magic on her tired spirit. The thought of eventually having to leave this place created only the gentlest sadness, because she sensed that the peace she was finding here was becoming part of her, something she would carry with her regardless of where her path might lead. As the sun continued its slow arc across the sky, Elena settled more deeply into her position by the fountain, feeling herself becoming part of the courtyard's rhythm, her breathing synchronized with the water's flow, her heartbeat aligned with the gentle pulse of this hidden sanctuary's timeless peace. Chapter 4: The Garden of Geometric Roses. As Elena's awareness expanded beyond the immediate sphere of the fountain's influence, she began to notice the extraordinary garden that surrounded this central water feature. The roses she had glimpsed earlier now revealed themselves in their full glory, not merely planted in decorative arrangements, but growing in precise, geometric patterns that seemed to demonstrate some fundamental truth about the relationship between natural beauty and mathematical harmony. Elena rose from her place beside the fountain, her movements now fluid and unhurried, as if the water's song had taught her body a new way of moving through space. She approached the nearest bed of roses, drawn by their unusual arrangement and the way they seemed to pulse gently with life and color in the golden afternoon light. The roses were planted in a series of interconnected spirals that flowed across the courtyard in waves of precise beauty. Each spiral began with a single central rose, a deep crimson bloom that seemed to glow with inner fire, and unwound outward in perfect mathematical progression. The colors shifted gradually along each spiral, deep red to warm pink, to pale coral, to cream, to pure white, creating ribbons of color that drew the eye in gentle, mesmerizing patterns. Elena knelt beside one of these spirals, marveling at how the roses seemed to have been guided to grow in exact alignment with the underlying geometric structure. Yet there was nothing forced or artificial about their arrangement. Each flower displayed the natural variations and individual character that made it unique, while still contributing to the overall pattern that was greater than the sum of its parts. As she examined the roses more closely, Elena noticed that their fragrance seemed to change depending on their position within the geometric pattern. The central roses carried the deep, complex scent of traditional garden roses, rich with undertones of spice and earth. As the spiral progressed outward, the fragrances became lighter and more ethereal, until the outermost white roses carried a scent so delicate it seemed to be made of air and morning light. The mathematics of the garden began to reveal itself as Elena moved from spiral to spiral. She realized that the patterns were based on the golden ratio, that ancient proportion that appeared throughout nature in everything from nautilus shells to the arrangement of leaves on a stem. But here, this natural law had been consciously employed to create a garden that was both utterly natural and perfectly designed. Elena found herself walking along the paths that wound between the geometric rose beds, her feet naturally following the curves that connected one pattern to another. The pathways themselves were works of art, paved with smooth stones that had been arranged in flowing patterns that complemented the rose spirals. Some stones were pale gray, others warm gold, and still others deep blue-green, creating a subtle mosaic underfoot that seemed to guide her steps without conscious effort on her part. As she walked, Elena became aware that the garden was alive with gentle sound. The roses themselves seemed to whisper as the breeze moved through their petals, creating a soft rustling that harmonized with the fountain's song. Bees moved lazily from bloom to bloom, their humming adding another layer to the courtyard's symphony. The overall effect was of a place where every element had been chosen and arranged to contribute to a greater harmony. Elena paused beside a particularly complex arrangement where 3 spirals intersected, creating a mandala-like pattern of extraordinary beauty. At the center of this intersection, a single rose grew that was unlike any of the others. Its petals seemed to contain all the colors of the surrounding spirals, shifting from deep red to pale gold to pure white, depending on the angle of view and the quality of light falling upon it. This central rose drew Elena's attention completely. As she gazed at it, she felt her breathing slow even further, her heartbeat finding a rhythm that seemed to match some deep pulse within the flower itself. The rose seemed to be teaching her something about the nature of beauty and perfection, how individual elements could maintain their unique character while contributing to patterns of meaning that transcended their separate existence. The scent of this central rose was indescribable, not just the fragrance of flowers, but something that seemed to contain the essence of peace itself. Elena found herself breathing it deeply, feeling each inhalation carry healing into her lungs, her bloodstream, and every cell of her body. The fragrance seemed to work directly on her nervous system, dissolving the last remnants of the tension and anxiety that had been her constant companions for so long. As Elena continued her exploration of the geometric garden, she noticed that the patterns seemed to shift and change depending on where she stood. From one vantage point, she could see the spiral nature of the plantings. From another, the roses appeared to form flowing waves that rippled across the courtyard like solidified music. From yet another position, the entire garden revealed itself as a single, vast mandala with the fountain at its center. The realization dawned on Elena that she was not simply observing this garden, but participating in it. Her presence, her movement through its patterns, her attention to its beauty, all of these were somehow completing the garden's design. She was not separate from the mathematical harmony she was witnessing, but was an integral part of it. Her consciousness serving as a kind of living center around which the garden's meaning could organize itself. This understanding filled Elena with a profound sense of belonging and purpose. She had spent so many months feeling disconnected from beauty and meaning, as if she were an observer standing outside the circle of life and peace. But here, in this geometric rose garden, she was discovering that she had never been separate from the harmony she sought. She had simply forgotten how to recognize her place within it. Elena settled cross-legged on a circular patch of soft grass at the intersection of several rose spirals, feeling the earth beneath her solid and supportive. From this position, she could see the entire garden spread around her, its patterns flowing in all directions like the visual representation of some cosmic song. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, their movement creating subtle shifts in the geometric patterns that were like watching mathematics dance. The sun had moved further across the sky, and the quality of light in the courtyard was becoming richer and more golden. This changing light revealed new aspects of the garden's design, shadows that created temporary patterns, highlights that emphasized certain roses while allowing others to recede into gentle obscurity. Elena realized that the garden was designed to be different at every moment, its beauty constantly evolving with the movement of sun and shadow, the growth of the roses, the changing seasons. As she sat in quiet contemplation, Elena felt her understanding of beauty and order expanding. The geometric patterns of the roses were not imposing human will upon nature, but rather revealing the mathematical principles that nature itself employed in creating beauty. The garden was a collaboration between human consciousness and natural intelligence, each contributing its unique gifts to create something that neither could achieve alone. The breeze stirred the roses around her, and Elena felt the movement of air against her skin like a gentle caress. She realized that she was being held by this place, supported not just by the earth beneath her, but by the entire web of relationships that connected every element of the courtyard into a single, harmonious whole. For the first time in months, Elena felt truly safe, not just physically protected, but held by a beauty and order that was both profound and utterly gentle. As the afternoon light continued to deepen toward evening, Elena remained in her place among the geometric roses, feeling herself becoming part of their pattern, her breathing synchronized with their subtle movements, her heartbeat finding its place in the garden's greater rhythm of peace and mathematical beauty. Chapter 5: The Golden Mosaics Awakening. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Elena became aware of a subtle transformation taking place around her. The golden light that had been warming the courtyard all afternoon was now striking the walls at different angles, and as it did so, the mosaics that adorned the ancient surfaces began to come alive in ways that took her breath away. Elena stood slowly from her place among the roses, her movements still carrying the fluid grace she had learned from the fountain's song. She approached the nearest wall, drawn by glimmers of gold that seemed to pulse gently in the changing light. As she drew closer, she could see that what had appeared to be simple decorative patterns were actually intricate scenes, crafted from thousands of tiny tiles, each one catching and reflecting the light in its own unique way. The mosaics told stories, Elena realized, but stories that seemed to exist in a realm beyond ordinary narrative. They depicted figures in flowing robes walking through gardens that might have been this very courtyard, their faces serene and their gestures conveying a sense of perfect peace. But these were not static images. As the light shifted and changed, the figures seemed to move slightly, their robes rippling in breezes that existed only in the realm of golden tile and mortar. Elena reached out to touch the surface of one mosaic, feeling the slightly irregular texture of the individual tiles beneath her fingertips. The gold tiles were warm to the touch, as if they had been storing sunlight throughout the day, and were now releasing it in gentle waves. The sensation was profoundly comforting, like being touched by sunlight that had been concentrated and refined into its purest essence. As she traced the outline of one of the mosaic figures with her finger, Elena felt a strange tingling in her hand, as if the ancient tiles were somehow alive and responsive to her touch. The golden tiles seemed to grow brighter under her fingertips, their light spreading outward in ripples that illuminated neighboring tiles and created cascading waves of luminescence across the wall's surface. Moving along the wall, Elena discovered that each section of mosaic depicted a different aspect of the same essential theme: the journey toward peace and rest. One panel showed figures approaching a fountain much like the one at the center of this courtyard. Another depicted people tending roses that grew in geometric patterns identical to those surrounding her now. A third showed individuals lying in peaceful repose beneath trees heavy with golden fruit, their faces expressing the profound contentment that comes from perfect rest. The craftsmanship of the mosaics was extraordinary, but what struck Elena most was the way they seemed to be created specifically for this time of day, when the sun's angle would bring them to their fullest life. She realized that the ancient artisans who had created these works had understood not just the visual impact of their art, but its temporal dimension as well, how it would interact with the daily rhythm of light and shadow to create moments of particular beauty and meaning. As Elena continued her circuit of the courtyard's walls, she found herself moving more slowly, allowing her eyes to adjust to the subtle variations in light and color that revealed new details in the mosaics. With each step, the golden tiles formed the foundation of most scenes, creating backgrounds of warm radiance against which other colors played their parts. Deep blue tiles suggested water and sky, while green tiles created the illusion of living vegetation that seemed to sway in eternal breezes. One mosaic in particular captured Elena's attention, a large panel that occupied the center of the eastern wall. It depicted a figure seated beside a fountain, surrounded by geometric patterns of roses, while golden light streamed down from above. The figure's posture was one of perfect relaxation, head tilted back slightly to receive the light, hands resting peacefully in the lap. Elena realized with a start that this figure was positioned almost exactly as she herself had been sitting by the fountain earlier in the afternoon. As she studied this mosaic more closely, Elena noticed that the figure's face bore a subtle resemblance to her own, not in specific features, but in the expression of someone who had found the peace they had long been seeking. The realization sent a gentle shock through her system, as if the ancient artists had somehow foreseen her arrival and had created this image specifically for her to discover. The golden tiles in this particular mosaic seemed more luminous than the others, creating an effect of radiance that seemed to emanate from within the wall itself. As Elena watched, the light in these tiles seemed to pulse gently, creating a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. She found herself breathing in synchronization with this pulse, feeling her entire body resonating with the frequency of the golden light. Standing before this mystical mirror of herself, Elena felt something deep within her chest begin to unlock. The image in the mosaic was not just showing her what she looked like in this moment of peace. It was showing her what she truly was beneath all the layers of worry and exhaustion she had carried for so long. The mosaic was reflecting back to her the essential nature of her being, the part of her that had always been at peace, even when her mind had forgotten how to access that peace. Elena reached out to touch the golden tiles that formed the figure's heart. And as her fingers made contact with the warm surface, she felt a surge of recognition that brought tears to her eyes. This was not just art. It was a form of ancient technology designed to remind souls of their true nature. The mosaics were mirrors that reflected not physical appearance, but spiritual reality. As understanding dawned, Elena noticed that all the mosaics around the courtyard were beginning to respond to her presence in similar ways. The golden tiles throughout the various scenes were growing brighter, creating a network of light that connected all the panels into a single, coherent vision. The figures in the mosaics seemed to be turning their attention toward her, their painted eyes becoming more lifelike, their expressions more welcoming. The entire courtyard was now bathed in the golden radiance emanating from the walls, creating an atmosphere that seemed to exist halfway between the physical world and some realm of pure light and peace. Elena found herself at the center of this golden embrace, feeling the warmth of the mosaic light on her skin and the deeper warmth of recognition in her heart. She began to understand that this place had been waiting for her specifically, not just Elena the individual, but Elena as a representative of all souls who had lost their way and were seeking to remember their path home to peace. The mosaics were not just decorative art, but a form of ancient wisdom preserved in gold and stone, designed to activate in the presence of sincere seekers who were ready to receive their healing message. As the sun sank lower in the sky, the golden light from the mosaics seemed to intensify, creating a self-sustaining radiance that no longer depended entirely on the external light source. Elena realized that the mosaics were somehow storing and amplifying the light they received, creating a reservoir of illumination that could provide comfort and guidance even in the darkest hours. Elena walked slowly around the perimeter of the courtyard, allowing her fingers to trail along the mosaic surfaces, feeling the warmth and subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the golden tiles. Each panel told its part of the larger story, and as she moved from scene to scene, she began to understand that she was witnessing not just art, but a kind of visual scripture designed to guide souls through their journey toward perfect rest. The final mosaic she encountered, on the wall opposite the entrance through which she had arrived, depicted a scene that seemed to look forward into possibility rather than back into memory. It showed figures who had been transformed by their time in the sanctuary, their forms somehow more luminous than ordinary human bodies, their faces radiant with the deep peace that comes from having touched something eternal. As Elena studied this scene, she felt a profound hope beginning to bloom in her chest. The hope that such transformation was not just possible, but inevitable for anyone who surrendered fully to the healing power of this place. As twilight approached and the direct sunlight faded from the courtyard, the mosaics continued to glow with their stored golden light, creating an atmosphere of eternal afternoon that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time. Elena found herself standing in the center of the courtyard once again, surrounded by the fountain's endless song, the geometric beauty of the roses, and the gentle radiance of the ancient mosaics, feeling that she had discovered not just a hidden place, but a hidden aspect of reality itself, a realm where beauty and peace were not temporary experiences, but permanent possibilities available to any soul willing to step through the flowering threshold of surrender. Chapter 6: The Moonlight Transformation. As the last rays of direct sunlight faded from the courtyard, Elena might have expected darkness to fall and the magical quality of the place to diminish. Instead, she discovered that nightfall in this sanctuary brought not darkness, but transformation, a shift into an even more profound state of peace and beauty that seemed to exist in a realm beyond ordinary time and space. The moon, though not yet full, appeared above the courtyard walls like a silver lantern, suspended in the deep blue sky. Its light, instead of creating the harsh shadows and stark contrasts that moonlight usually produced, seemed to blend with the stored golden radiance of the mosaics to create an entirely new quality of illumination. This combined light was neither gold nor silver, but something altogether more mysterious, a luminescence that seemed to come from within the very air itself. Elena watched in wonder as this transformation took place around her. The roses, which had been beautiful in the afternoon sunlight, now revealed hidden aspects of their nature as the moonlight touched their petals. Colors that had been invisible in daylight now emerged, deep purples that seemed to glow from within, subtle blues that appeared in the shadows of white blooms, and silver highlights that made the geometric patterns seem to shift and breathe with new life. The fountain's song, too, seemed to change in the moonlight. The water's voice became richer and more complex, gaining harmonics that had not been present before. Elena realized that the fountain was designed to respond to different qualities of light. Its carved channels and pools shaped in such a way that the changing illumination would alter the acoustic properties of the flowing water. In the moonlight, the fountain sang lullabies of such beauty that Elena felt her very cells beginning to relax in response to their healing frequencies. Elena moved to her favorite spot beside the fountain, settling onto the stone bench with movements that were now completely fluid and natural. As she did so, she noticed that her own perception seemed to be shifting as well. Colors appeared more vivid and saturated than ever before, while at the same time seeming to blend and flow into each other in ways that defied ordinary visual logic. The boundaries between different elements of the courtyard, roses, stones, water, air, seemed less distinct, as if everything were participating in a single, unified dance of beauty and peace. The mosaics in this changed light revealed entirely new aspects of their ancient artistry. Tiles that had appeared purely golden in the daylight now showed subtle variations of color and texture that created depth and movement previously unseen. The figures in the mosaics seemed more lifelike than ever, their robes appearing to flow with actual movement, their eyes reflecting the moonlight with an intelligence that seemed almost conscious. Elena found herself drawn to touch the water of the fountain, and as her fingers broke the surface, she gasped softly at the sensation. The water felt different in the moonlight, not just cooler, but somehow more substantial, as if it had gained additional properties that her skin could sense, but her mind could not quite categorize. The water seemed to tingle against her fingertips with a gentle energy that spread up her arm and throughout her body, carrying with it a quality of renewal that she felt in her bones. As Elena cupped the water in her palms and brought it to her face, she caught sight of her reflection in the fountain's surface and barely recognized herself. The face looking back at her was undeniably her own, yet it seemed transformed by the peace she had found in this place. The lines of worry and exhaustion that had become so familiar had softened and faded, replaced by an expression of such serenity that it took her breath away. Her eyes, which had been dull with fatigue for so many months, now reflected the combined gold and silver light of the courtyard with a clarity that seemed to come from some deep inner source. Elena realized that the transformation she was seeing in her reflection was not just surface-level relaxation, but something much more profound. The peace she had found in this sanctuary was working changes in her at the cellular level, rewriting patterns of stress and tension that had been encoded in her body for years. She was not just resting in this place. She was being remade by it, restored to a version of herself that had existed before worry and sleeplessness had become her constant companions. The night air carried new fragrances as well. The roses released different scents in the moonlight, creating an olfactory symphony that was both subtle and intoxicating. Elena breathed deeply, feeling each inhalation carry healing not just into her lungs, but into her entire being. The scents seemed to work directly on her nervous system, triggering responses of peace and safety that bypassed her conscious mind and spoke directly to the ancient, instinctual parts of her brain that governed rest and restoration. As she sat by the fountain in the magical light of moon and mosaic, Elena became aware that she was experiencing something that went beyond ordinary relaxation or even ordinary healing. This was a return to a state of being that she was beginning to remember as her natural condition, a way of existing in the world that was characterized by perfect ease, profound peace, and an unshakable sense of belonging to the greater harmony of life. The geometric patterns of the roses seemed to pulse gently in the moonlight, creating visual rhythms that synchronized with Elena's breathing and heartbeat. She found herself becoming mesmerized by these patterns, her consciousness settling into ever deeper states of peace as she watched the interplay of moonlight and shadow across the mathematical beauty of the garden. Each spiral of roses seemed to be drawing her awareness inward, toward a center of perfect stillness that existed not just in the garden, but within her own being. Elena's thoughts, which had been chaotic and restless for so long, now moved with the same gentle rhythm as the fountain's song. Instead of the anxious circling that had characterized her mental activity for months, her thoughts now flowed like the water itself, purposeful but unhurried, clear but not harsh, moving always toward greater peace and understanding rather than toward worry and confusion. As the night deepened around her, Elena felt herself entering a state that was neither sleep nor waking, but something altogether more restorative. In this state, she could feel the healing power of the sanctuary working on every level of her being: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Tensions she had carried for years were dissolving, replaced by a flexibility and ease that felt like returning home after a long, difficult journey. The mosaics continued to pulse gently with their stored light, creating a rhythm that seemed to match the deep, slow breathing of the earth itself. Elena felt herself breathing in harmony with this cosmic rhythm, her individual breath becoming part of the larger respiration of the sanctuary, the city, the planet, and beyond. In this expanded state of awareness, she understood that the peace she was experiencing was not separate from her, but was her truest nature, the foundation upon which all her thoughts and experiences were built. The fountain's song had become so familiar now that it seemed to originate from within her own heart rather than from the external world. Elena realized that the boundary between herself and the sanctuary was becoming increasingly meaningless. She was not simply visiting this place of peace, but was discovering that she had always been part of it, that her seeking had been a remembering rather than a searching for something new. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, its light growing stronger and more silver, Elena felt herself settling into a quality of rest that was deeper than any sleep she had ever known. In this rest, healing happened not through effort, but through surrender, not through trying, but through allowing. She was being held by forces larger and more benevolent than she had ever imagined possible, cradled in a web of beauty and peace that extended far beyond the walls of this hidden courtyard and into the very structure of reality itself. Chapter 7: The Deepening Rest. In the deepening embrace of the moonlit sanctuary, Elena discovered that rest was not simply the absence of activity, but a positive state of being that had its own richness and depth. As she remained by the fountain through the peaceful hours of the night, she found herself exploring territories of consciousness that she had never known existed, realms where healing happened without effort and peace grew stronger through stillness. The quality of Elena's awareness had shifted into something that felt both deeply personal and utterly universal. She remained fully conscious, yet her consciousness had expanded beyond the usual boundaries of individual selfhood to encompass the entire rhythm and flow of the sanctuary around her. She could feel the slow pulse of sap rising in the rose stems, the gentle circulation of water through the fountain's hidden channels, and the gradual rotation of the earth beneath the ancient stones. This expanded awareness brought with it a profound sense of safety that Elena had not felt since early childhood. The sanctuary held her with the unconditional protection of a perfect mother, creating a space where every part of her being could relax completely. Her nervous system, which had been locked in patterns of vigilance and anxiety for so long, finally received permission to release its guard and trust in the fundamental benevolence of existence. As the night progressed, Elena became aware that her body was undergoing subtle but profound changes. Muscles that had been contracted for months were lengthening and softening. Her breathing was becoming deeper and more rhythmic, drawing oxygen into parts of her lungs that had been closed off by tension. Her heart rate had slowed to match the gentle pulse of the fountain's flow, creating a harmony between her internal rhythms and the external environment. But the changes went deeper than the physical level. Elena could feel old patterns of thought and emotion being gently dissolved and replaced by new ones. Beliefs about struggle and effort that had driven her restless seeking were being washed away by the fountain's song, replaced by a knowing that true peace came not through striving, but through surrender. Fear-based patterns that had kept her nervous system in constant activation were being overwritten by new patterns based on trust and safety. The mosaics around the courtyard continued to pulse with their soft golden light, and Elena began to understand that they were not just art, but a form of healing technology. The patterns and colors had been specifically chosen to work on the human nervous system, creating visual rhythms that encouraged the brain to produce states of deep peace and restoration. As she gazed at the mosaics, Elena could feel her brain waves shifting into patterns associated with profound meditation and healing sleep. The roses, too, were contributing to this healing environment in ways that went beyond their visual beauty. Their fragrances, especially intense in the cool night air, contained natural compounds that worked directly on the limbic system to promote feelings of safety and well-being. Elena found herself breathing these fragrances as if they were medicine, feeling each inhalation carry relaxation deeper into her system. As Elena's rest deepened, she began to experience something that could only be described as cellular rejuvenation. She could feel her body beginning to repair damage that had accumulated during her months of poor sleep and chronic stress. Her immune system was strengthening. Her digestive system was relaxing and healing, and her endocrine system was rebalancing itself naturally. The sanctuary was creating conditions that allowed her body's innate healing wisdom to emerge and do its work. Elena's relationship with time was changing as well. The urgent, pressured sense of time that had driven her restless seeking was being replaced by an understanding of time as circular and generous rather than linear and scarce. There was no hurry in this place, no sense that she needed to accomplish anything or get anywhere. Time had become elastic, expanding to accommodate whatever healing needed to happen in its own natural rhythm. In this timeless state, Elena found herself accessing memories of peace that went back to her earliest childhood, times when she had felt completely safe and held by the world around her. But she was also accessing something that seemed to go even deeper than personal memory, a kind of species memory of what it felt like to live in harmony with natural rhythms, to be supported by environments designed for human flourishing. The fountain's song had become so integrated with Elena's consciousness that she no longer heard it as an external sound, but as the soundtrack of her own being. The water's voice had become her inner voice, speaking constantly of peace, flow, and the endless availability of renewal. She understood now that this voice had always been there, but the noise of her busy mind had prevented her from hearing it. As the moon reached its zenith above the courtyard, Elena felt herself entering the deepest level of rest she had ever experienced. In this state, she was neither asleep nor awake, but suspended in a place between the two that seemed to offer the benefits of both. Her consciousness remained clear and aware, while her body gained all the restoration that comes from the deepest sleep. Elena could feel layers of accumulated exhaustion being lifted away from her, being like old clothes being removed. each layer that fell away revealed more of her essential self, the part of her that had never been tired, never been worried, never been separate from the peace she sought. She was discovering that beneath all the tiredness and stress was a self that was eternally fresh, eternally at peace, eternally connected to the source of all healing and renewal. The geometric patterns of the roses seemed to be teaching Elena something about the nature of perfect order. She began to understand that the mathematical precision of their arrangement was not imposed from outside, but was the natural expression of life when it was allowed to unfold without interference. The roses were showing her that peace and beauty were not exceptions in the universe, but were the fundamental organizing principles from which everything else emerged. In this deep rest, Elena's heart began to open in ways that surprised her. Feelings of love and gratitude that had been buried under layers of stress and worry began to surface naturally. She felt profound appreciation for the unknown creators of this sanctuary, for the roses that shared their beauty and fragrance, for the fountain that sang its eternal song of peace. But beyond these specific objects of gratitude, she felt a general love for existence itself, a recognition that life, at its core, was an endless offering of beauty and peace to any consciousness willing to receive it. As the night air grew cooler, Elena found that she was perfectly warm, heated from within by the peace that was radiating from her own being. The sanctuary had taught her that she carried within herself everything she needed for comfort and well-being. She was not dependent on external conditions for her peace, but could access an inner source of warmth and security that was always available. Elena's breathing had become so deep and slow that each breath seemed to last for minutes. In the space between breaths, she found vast territories of silence and stillness that seemed to contain infinite possibilities for healing and renewal. She was learning to rest not just between activities, but between thoughts, between heartbeats, between breaths, discovering that these spaces of emptiness were actually fullness itself. As the deep night hours passed, Elena remained in this state of profound rest, feeling herself being rebuilt from the inside out by forces of healing that required no effort on her part. She had found what she had been seeking all along, not just a place to rest, but a way of being that was itself rest, a state of consciousness that was naturally peaceful, naturally healing, naturally whole. Chapter 8: The Night Guardians. As Elena rested in the profound peace of the deepening night, she gradually became aware that she was not alone in the sanctuary. Moving at the edges of her consciousness, barely visible in the combined light of moon and mosaic, were presences that seemed to be guardians of this sacred space, beings whose purpose was to watch over those who had found their way to this place of healing and rest. Elena's first glimpse of these guardians came as gentle movements in her peripheral vision, shadows that moved with too much purpose to be random, forms that seemed to glide rather than walk among the geometric patterns of roses. Far from feeling alarmed by these presences, Elena found herself filled with an even deeper sense of safety and protection. These beings, whatever they were, emanated the same quality of peace that permeated every other aspect of the sanctuary. As her awareness adjusted to this new dimension of the courtyard's reality, Elena began to see the guardians more clearly. They appeared to be figures draped in flowing garments that seemed to be woven from moonlight itself, robes that shifted between silver and gold, and occasionally became completely transparent, allowing her to see through them to the roses and walls beyond. Their faces, when she could make them out, bore expressions of infinite compassion and timeless peace. The guardians moved through the courtyard with fluid grace, tending to the roses with gestures that seemed to be blessings rather than physical care. Elena watched as one of them approached a spiral of blooms and simply stood in quiet contemplation, hands extended toward the flowers. Under this attention, the roses seemed to glow more brightly, their fragrances becoming richer and more healing. The guardian was somehow nourishing the plants with pure intention and love. Another guardian approached the fountain and stood beside it in a posture that mirrored Elena's own earlier position. As this being communed with the singing water, the fountain's song gained new harmonics, becoming even more complex and beautiful. Elena realized that the guardians were not separate from the sanctuary, but were part of its living system, conscious beings whose presence helped maintain and enhance the healing environment. Elena found herself able to communicate with the guardians, though not through words or even thoughts in the ordinary sense. Instead, there was a form of heart-to-heart communication that happened through shared feeling and gentle waves of intention. When she projected gratitude toward them, Elena felt waves of loving acknowledgement flowing back to her. When she wondered about their nature and purpose, understanding came to her directly, bypassing the thinking mind entirely. Through this wordless communication, Elena learned that the guardians were beings who had once been seekers like herself, souls who had found their way to this sanctuary in their own times of need, and had been so transformed by the experience that they had chosen to remain as helpers for others who would follow. They had evolved beyond the need for physical form, but maintained enough substance to be able to interact with the sanctuary and its visitors. The presence of these guardians added a new dimension to Elena's rest and healing. she felt herself being held not just by the physical environment of the courtyard, but by the loving attention of these conscious beings who understood exactly what she was experiencing and what she needed for complete restoration. Their care was so gentle and unobtrusive that it enhanced rather than interrupted her deep rest. As the night progressed, Elena noticed that the guardians seemed to work in subtle harmony with the natural rhythms of the sanctuary. When the moon was at its brightest, they became more visible and active, their movements creating gentle currents in the energy of the courtyard that enhanced the healing power of the moonlight. When clouds passed across the moon, the guardians seemed to fade into the background, allowing the space to settle into deeper quiet. One guardian in particular seemed drawn to Elena's presence, this being approached slowly and settled into a position nearby, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to share its peaceful energy. Elena felt a profound sense of companionship from this presence, not the companionship of shared conversation or activity, but the deeper communion of shared silence and mutual recognition of the sacred nature of the healing process. Through her connection with this guardian, Elena began to understand more about the nature of the sanctuary itself. She learned that this courtyard existed in a space between worlds, still part of the physical realm, but touching on dimensions where peace and healing were not just possible, but inevitable. The sanctuary served as a bridge between ordinary consciousness and states of being where suffering was not possible. The guardian's presence also helped Elena understand that her experience in the sanctuary was both deeply personal and part of a larger pattern. Countless souls before her had found their way to this place of healing, each one unique in their needs and circumstances, but all sharing the fundamental human longing for peace and rest. The sanctuary had been healing tired souls for centuries, perhaps millennia, accumulating layers of blessing and healing energy that made each new visitor's transformation easier and more complete. Elena realized that the guardians were not just witnesses to her healing, but active participants in it. Their presence created a field of consciousness that supported and accelerated the natural healing processes that the sanctuary facilitated. They were like midwives to the soul's rebirth, offering exactly the right quality of attention and care to help each visitor's transformation unfold as smoothly as possible. As Elena's rest deepened under the gentle watch of the guardians, she found herself accessing states of consciousness that she had never known existed. These were not dream states or ordinary sleep, but realms of awareness where healing happened at the level of the soul itself. In these states, she could feel old wounds being tended by forces of love so pure and powerful that they dissolved pain without effort. The guardians seemed to serve as guides to these deeper realms of healing, their presence helping Elena navigate territories of consciousness that might have been overwhelming without their support. They held space for her transformation while ensuring that she never moved too quickly or pushed beyond what she was ready to integrate. Their care was both protective and liberating, creating safety that allowed for the deepest possible surrender. Elena found herself filled with profound gratitude for these mysterious beings who had chosen to dedicate themselves to helping others find peace. Their selfless service was itself a form of teaching, showing her what it looked like to live from a place of pure love and compassion. In their presence, she began to understand that this quality of loving service was not something foreign to her own nature, but was the natural expression of consciousness when it had been restored to its original state of peace. As the night reached its deepest point, Elena felt herself cradled by the combined care of the guardians, the healing environment of the sanctuary, and the vast, benevolent intelligence that had created this space for soul restoration. She was being held in a web of love so complete and unconditional that every cell in her body could finally release its vigilance and trust completely in the process of healing and renewal. The guardians continued their gentle watch throughout the night, their presence a constant reminder that Elena was not alone in her journey toward peace, and that forces of healing were always available to support any soul sincere in its desire for transformation. Under their protection, Elena settled even more deeply into the restorative rest that was rebuilding her from the inside out, preparing her for the new day and the new self that would emerge from this night of profound healing. Chapter 9: The Dawn Awakening. As the deepest part of the night gave way to the first stirrings of dawn, Elena found herself gradually emerging from the profound rest that had carried her through the dark hours. But this awakening was unlike any she had ever experienced. Instead of the jarring transition from sleep to consciousness that had characterized her mornings for so long, this was a gentle flowering of awareness that seemed to unfold as naturally as the roses opening to the morning light. Elena's consciousness expanded slowly, like ripples moving outward from a stone dropped into still water. First came awareness of her breath, deeper and more rhythmic than it had been in months. Then awareness of her body, feeling lighter and more vital than she could remember. Finally, awareness of the sanctuary around her, still glowing softly with the accumulated light of the Mosaics and the gentle radiance of the guardians who continued their loving watch. The sky above the courtyard was beginning to show the first hints of dawn, not the harsh line of sunrise that splits day from night, but a gradual brightening that seemed to emerge from within the air itself. The darkness was not being replaced by light, but was being revealed to have been light all along, simply wearing the gentle mask of night to allow for deeper rest and healing. As this soft illumination grew stronger, Elena could see the sanctuary transforming once again. The roses, which had been mysterious and silvery in the moonlight, now began to reveal new colors as the dawn light touched their petals. Shades of pink and coral and cream emerged from what had seemed to be white blooms, while the red roses showed depths of burgundy and wine that had been invisible in the darker hours. The fountain's song, too, was changing with the coming of day. The water's voice gained brighter harmonics that seemed to celebrate the return of light, while still maintaining the deep, peaceful tones that had provided such comfort throughout the night. Elena realized that the fountain was designed to sing different songs at different times, its voice evolving with the natural rhythms of day and night to provide exactly what each moment required. Elena stretched slowly, marveling at how different her body felt. The stiffness and tension that had been her constant companions were gone, replaced by a flexibility and ease that made every movement feel like a form of dance. Her muscles felt strong but relaxed. Her joints moved freely, and her spine seemed to have gained inches as the compression of chronic stress had been released. But the most remarkable change was in her mind. The anxious chatter that had filled her thoughts for so many months was completely quiet, replaced by a stillness that was not empty, but full, pregnant with possibility and peace. When thoughts did arise, they moved like clouds across a clear sky, interesting to observe, but not demanding her attention or creating any disturbance in the fundamental calm that now characterized her mental state. Elena rose from her place beside the fountain and began to walk slowly around the courtyard, reacquainting herself with the space that had become so familiar during the night. Everything looked different in the growing light, not changed in its essential nature, but revealed more fully, as if the dawn were uncovering layers of beauty that had been there all along, but required this particular quality of illumination to be seen. The geometric patterns of the roses seemed even more intricate and meaningful in the dawn light. Elena could see now that the mathematical precision of their arrangement created not just visual beauty, but energy patterns that she could actually feel as she moved among them. The spirals seemed to generate gentle currents that swirled around her body, creating a subtle massage that enhanced the deep relaxation that permeated her being. The mosaics, which had been so luminous in the moonlight, now revealed yet another aspect of their artistry. In the soft light of dawn, new details emerged that had been invisible before. Subtle variations in the golden tiles that created depth and movement. Tiny touches of color in other tiles that added complexity to the overall composition. Elena realized that the mosaics had been designed to be experienced at all hours, each quality of light revealing different aspects of their beauty and meaning. As Elena continued her slow circuit of the courtyard, she became aware that the guardians were still present, but were beginning to fade as the light grew stronger. They were not disappearing entirely, but were becoming more transparent, their forms blending more completely with the environment they helped to maintain before they faded completely. Elena felt a final wave of blessing from these beings, a transmission of love and encouragement that seemed to say that she carried their protection with her always. The growing light revealed something else that Elena had not noticed in the darkness. Other archways leading out of the courtyard, each one framed with different flowering vines, and each one seeming to lead in a different direction. Elena realized that this sanctuary was not an endpoint, but a hub, a place of rest and restoration that connected to many paths and possibilities. She was not trapped here, but was being prepared for whatever journey would come next. But for now, Elena felt no urgency to explore these other pathways. The dawn was teaching her about the natural rhythm of emergence, how consciousness, like flowers, needed to open gradually to be able to fully receive and integrate the light. She was content to remain in the courtyard, allowing the gentle brightening of the day to continue the healing process that had begun in the darkness. Elena returned to the fountain and cupped some of the singing water in her hands, bringing it to her lips. The water tasted different in the dawn light, cleaner and more vital than before, carrying flavors of mountain springs and morning rain. As she drank, Elena felt the water's healing properties spreading through her body, completing the process of cellular renewal that had been happening throughout the night. Looking at her reflection in the fountain's surface, Elena saw a face that was recognizably her own, yet somehow completely transformed. The lines of worry and exhaustion had been replaced by a soft radiance that seemed to come from within. Her eyes were clear and bright, reflecting not just the external light, but an inner illumination that would remain constant regardless of external circumstances. Elena understood now that she had found what she had been seeking, though it had turned out to be something quite different from what she had expected. She had thought she was looking for a place to rest, but what she had discovered was a way of being that was itself rest. She had thought she needed to escape from her life, but what she had found was a way to be present in her life from a completely different state of consciousness. The transformation was complete, yet Elena sensed that it was also just beginning. The peace she had found in the sanctuary was not something that belonged to this place alone, but was her natural state, accessible anywhere and at any time. The courtyard had not given her something new, but had reminded her of what had always been true about her deepest nature. As the sun began to rise above the walls of the courtyard, casting its first direct rays into the space that had been her sanctuary through the night, Elena felt ready to begin the gentle transition back into the world beyond these protective walls. But she carried with her now an unshakable knowing that peace was not a destination to be reached, but a presence to be embodied, not a state to be achieved, but a truth to be remembered. The dawn chorus of birds began to fill the air with their songs, adding their voices to the fountain's eternal music. Elena listened to this symphony of water and wings and felt her heart overflowing with gratitude for the mysterious grace that had led her to this place of healing and transformation. She was ready to rejoin the world, but she would never again be the same person who had wandered the ancient streets the day before, driven by restless seeking and the exhaustion of a soul that had forgotten its way home to peace. Chapter 10: The Gift of Integration. As the full light of morning illuminated the sanctuary, Elena found herself in a state of profound integration, not just rested and healed, but fundamentally transformed at every level of her being. The peace she had discovered was no longer something external that she was experiencing, but had become the very foundation of her consciousness, the ground from which all her thoughts and perceptions would now arise. Elena moved through her morning in the courtyard with the unhurried grace of someone who had remembered that time itself was a gift to be savored rather than a resource to be consumed. Each moment seemed to contain infinite depth and possibility, and she found herself naturally present to the beauty and meaning that existed in the simplest activities, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin, listening to the layered complexity of the fountain's song, breathing the fragrant air that seemed to nourish not just her lungs, but her soul. The roses around her seemed to be celebrating the morning in their own way, their colors more vivid and their fragrances more intense than they had been at any other time. Elena understood that she was witnessing these flowers in their moment of greatest beauty and vitality, and she felt honored to be present for this daily miracle of flowering consciousness. The geometric patterns of their arrangement now seemed like a visual representation of the mathematical harmony that she could feel operating within her own being. As Elena spent these final hours in the sanctuary, she began to understand that the transformation she had undergone was not just personal, but was part of a larger pattern of healing that rippled outward to touch everything around her. Her presence in the courtyard, her deep rest and restoration, her opening to peace, all of this had contributed something valuable to the overall energy of the sanctuary. Just as the sanctuary had given its gifts to her, Elena realized that she was now part of an invisible network of souls who had been touched by this place and who carried its essence with them wherever they went. Each person who found their way to the sanctuary and allowed themselves to be healed became a seed of peace in the world, carrying the possibility of transformation to others who might never physically find this hidden courtyard, but who could still be touched by the peace it represented. The mosaics around the courtyard seemed to pulse gently with acknowledgement as Elena recognized her new role as a carrier of peace. The figures depicted in the ancient tiles now seemed less like artistic representations and more like portraits of real people who had undergone the same transformation she was experiencing. She understood that she was joining a lineage of healers and peacemakers that stretched back through centuries, all connected by their shared experience of this sanctuary's gifts. Elena approached each of the flowering archways that led away from the courtyard, not with the intention of leaving immediately, but to understand the choices that lay before her. Each archway seemed to lead toward a different possibility, different ways of carrying the peace she had found back into the world. One archway was framed with jasmine and seemed to lead toward paths of service and healing. Another, wreathed in climbing roses, appeared to offer opportunities for creative expression and beauty making. A third, adorned with honeysuckle, suggested paths of teaching and wisdom sharing, but Elena felt no pressure to choose immediately among these possibilities. The sanctuary had taught her that right action emerged naturally from a state of peace, without force or struggle. When the time came for her to leave this place, she would know intuitively which path was hers to follow. For now, it was enough to simply be present to the fullness of the transformation she had received. Elena returned to the fountain for what she sensed would be her final communion with its healing waters. As she sat beside the singing streams, she felt the fountain offering her its final gift, not something new, but a complete integration of everything she had received during her time in the sanctuary. The water's song seemed to be encoding itself into her cellular memory, ensuring that she would always carry this healing frequency with her. As Elena listened to the fountain's eternal song, she felt her own inner voice awakening, not the anxious chatter of her worried mind, but the clear, calm voice of her authentic self. This inner voice spoke to her of her true purpose and her unique gifts, reminding her of dreams and aspirations that had been buried under years of stress and struggle. She understood now that the peace she had found was not an end in itself, but was the foundation from which her real life could finally begin. Elena cupped the fountain's water in her hands one final time, but instead of drinking it, she gently anointed her forehead, her heart, and her hands, blessing herself with the sanctuary's essence and claiming her role as a bearer of its peace. As the water touched her skin, she felt a final wave of transformation wash through her being, sealing all the healing she had received and preparing her for the journey ahead. Rising from the fountain with movements that felt like a graceful dance, Elena walked slowly around the courtyard one final time, saying goodbye to each element that had contributed to her healing. She touched the roses gently, feeling their life force pulse beneath her fingertips. She placed her hands on the warm stones of the mosaics, feeling the ancient wisdom they contained flowing into her palms. She breathed deeply of the fragrant air, storing its essence in her lungs and her memory. As Elena completed her circuit of the courtyard, she felt a profound sense of completion, not the completion of an ending, but the completion of a beginning. She was not the same person who had wandered the ancient streets the day before, driven by exhaustion and seeking something she could not name. She was now someone who carried within herself an unshakable foundation of peace, someone who could offer to the world the same quality of healing presence that the sanctuary had offered to her. Elena approached the archway through which she had originally entered the courtyard, but she paused before crossing the threshold. Looking back at the sanctuary one final time, she felt not sadness at leaving, but gratitude beyond words for the gift she had received. The courtyard would always be here, she realized, not just as a physical place, but as a state of consciousness she could access whenever she needed to remember the peace that was her truest nature. As Elena stepped through the flowering archway and back into the ancient streets of the city, she carried with her the fountain's eternal song, the mathematical harmony of the roses, the golden light of the mosaics, and the loving presence of the guardians. But most importantly, she carried the knowing that peace was not something to be sought, but something to be embodied, not a destination to be reached, but a way of being to be lived. The streets beyond the sanctuary seemed different now, not changed in their physical appearance, but revealed as part of the same fundamental harmony that she had experienced in the courtyard. Elena walked with the same unhurried grace that had characterized her final hours in the sanctuary, her movements creating gentle ripples of peace that touched everyone she passed. People turned to look at her with curiosity and something that might have been recognition, as if her presence reminded them of something beautiful they had forgotten. Elena understood now that her time in the sanctuary had been preparation for a larger mission, to carry the essence of that sacred space into the ordinary world, to be a living bridge between the realm of perfect peace and the realm of daily life. Wherever she went, she would carry with her the possibility of transformation, the reminder that sanctuary was always available to any soul ready to step through the flowering threshold of surrender. As Elena made her way through the ancient city, she moved with the confidence of someone who had found what she had been seeking and who now knew that her true journey was just beginning. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light on the weathered stones of the ancient buildings, and Elena walked forward into her new life with the fountain's song echoing in her heart, and the certainty that she would never again forget the way home to peace. Epilogue, the eternal return. Months later, Elena would often find herself pausing in the midst of her daily activities, suddenly aware of the fountain's song playing softly in the background of her consciousness. The melody had become the soundtrack of her life, a constant reminder of the peace that formed the foundation of her being. Whether she was walking through busy city streets, sitting in meetings, or lying in bed at night, the water's eternal voice was always there, offering its gentle teaching about flow and surrender and the endless availability of renewal. The transformation Elena had experienced in the Byzantine garden sanctuary had proven to be not a temporary respite, but a permanent shift in her way of being in the world. The peace she had discovered was not something that could be lost or taken away, because it was not separate from her essential nature. It was her essential nature, simply remembered and embodied after years of forgetfulness. Elena's friends and colleagues often commented on the change in her, though they could not always identify exactly what was different. Some spoke of a quality of calm that seemed to emanate from her presence. Others noticed that she moved through challenges and difficulties with an ease that suggested she had access to some inner resource that sustained her regardless of external circumstances. Still others were drawn to spend time with her because her presence somehow reminded them of something beautiful and peaceful within themselves. Elena had indeed become a carrier of the sanctuary's essence, just as she had sensed she would during her final hours in the courtyard. But she had learned that this role did not require her to speak about her experience or to try to convince others of anything. Instead, she found that simply embodying the peace she had discovered was itself a form of service, creating ripples of possibility that touched lives in ways she might never fully know. Sometimes, when Elena encountered someone who seemed to be carrying the same quality of restless seeking that had once driven her own searching, she would find herself sharing stories of hidden courtyards and singing fountains, of roses arranged in mathematical patterns and mosaics that glowed with inner light. She never spoke of these things as literal facts, but as metaphors for the peace that was available to anyone willing to step through the flowering threshold of surrender. A few of these conversations had led to remarkable results. Elena had received letters and messages from people who had somehow found their way to their own versions of the sanctuary, sometimes physical places of extraordinary beauty and peace, sometimes internal states of consciousness that provided the same healing and restoration she had experienced. Elena understood that the Byzantine garden courtyard was not unique, but was one of many doorways that existed in the world for souls ready to remember their way home to peace. On quiet evenings, Elena would often sit by her window and look out at the city lights, feeling profound gratitude for the mysterious grace that had led her to the sanctuary when she most needed its gifts. She understood now that her months of restless seeking had been necessary preparation for the transformation she had undergone, that the very intensity of her need had created the magnetic force that drew her to the hidden courtyard. Elena had also come to understand that her experience in the sanctuary was not an ending, but a beginning, the first movement in a larger symphony of service and love that would continue to unfold throughout her life. She sensed that there would be other sanctuaries to discover, other aspects of peace to explore, other ways of serving the awakening of consciousness in the world. But even as Elena looked forward to whatever adventures lay ahead, she knew that she would never need to seek peace again in the way she had before finding the sanctuary. The courtyard had taught her that peace was not a destination to be reached, but a presence to be embodied, not a state to be achieved, but a truth to be remembered. Whatever else might happen in her life, Elena carried within herself an unshakable foundation of tranquility that no external circumstance could disturb. On particularly meaningful nights, Elena would find herself dreaming of the sanctuary, not as memory, but as ongoing experience. In these dreams, she would return to the courtyard and find it exactly as she had left it, the fountain still singing its eternal song, the roses still blooming in their geometric patterns, the mosaics still glowing with golden light. Sometimes in these dreams, she would encounter other visitors to the sanctuary, souls who were undergoing their own transformations. Sometimes she would simply sit by the fountain and allow herself to be renewed once again by its healing waters. Elena had learned that the sanctuary existed in a realm beyond ordinary space and time, accessible not just through physical doorways, but through the doorway of consciousness itself. Whenever she needed to remember the peace that was her truest nature, she could close her eyes and find herself once again in that timeless courtyard, held by the fountain's song and surrounded by the mathematical beauty of the roses. As Elena grew older, she found that her connection to the sanctuary deepened rather than faded. The fountain's song became more audible, not less. The peace she had discovered became more stable, not more fragile. She understood that she was not moving away from the sanctuary, but deeper into it, discovering new layers of its meaning and new dimensions of its healing power. Elena began to sense that someday, when her work in the ordinary world was complete, she would return to the sanctuary not as a visitor, but as one of the guardians she had encountered during her night of deepest healing. She would join the lineage of souls who had been so transformed by the courtyard's gifts that they chose to remain as helpers for others who would follow. The thought filled her not with sadness at leaving the world, but with profound purpose and anticipation. But that time was still far in the future. For now, Elena continued to walk through the world as a living bridge between the realm of perfect peace and the realm of daily life, carrying within herself the fountain's eternal song and the certainty that sanctuary was always available to any soul ready to remember the peace that was their birthright. In quiet moments, Elena would often whisper a blessing she had learned in the sanctuary, not in words, but in the language of the heart, sending waves of peace and healing to all souls who were still seeking, still wandering the ancient streets of their own searching, still preparing for their own discovery of the hidden courtyard where fountains sing, roses bloom in geometric patterns, and golden mosaics catch the light of an eternal sun. And in response to these blessings, Elena could sometimes hear, carried on the wind or whispered in the space between heartbeats, the sound of distant fountains beginning to sing, preparing to welcome the next weary traveler home to the peace that had always been waiting in the secret garden of their own transformed heart.